If you have been diagnosed with PCOS, you have been told a lie. The cysts your doctor warned you about, they do not actually exist. Polycystic Ovary Syndrome affects 1 in 10 women worldwide, and the global medical community is now quietly pushing to change the name entirely. Not because they discovered something new, but because they finally admitted the diagnosis has been built on a naming error that has been failing women for decades. And here is the part that should make you genuinely angry. The condition has almost nothing to do with your ovaries. Medicine has been staring at the wrong organ for 90 years, and women have been paying the price with treatments that suppress symptoms without ever touching the actual cause. Stay with me, because I'm going to show you the 4 specific blood tests that most doctors never order. Tests that reveal what is actually driving everything. And once you see the real mechanism behind this condition, you will never look at your diagnosis the same way again. First, what is a cyst? By clinical definition, a cyst is a fluid-filled sac that grows within tissue and eventually ruptures or is reabsorbed. The structures visible on ultrasound in a woman with PCOS are not cysts. They have never been cysts. They are immature follicles, developing eggs that froze at an early stage because the chemical signaling required to push them to full maturity completely failed. They did not grow abnormally, they simply stopped developing and remained. Multiple small follicles sitting in the ovary, looking on ultrasound like a string of pearls. In 1935, 2 American gynecologists named Stein and Leventhal discovered this condition via surgical laparotomy, physically examining enlarged pearlescent ovaries. They named the entire condition after the physical surgical pattern they saw on the tissue and anchored the entire medical framework to the ovaries. Medicine blindly followed that map for the next 90 years. Today, we see the same pattern on modern ultrasound scans, but the diagnostic mistake remains exactly the same. Treating PCOS by focusing on the ovaries is like treating a house fire by repainting the walls. The ovaries are not the source of the problem. They are where the damage shows up, and there is a massive difference between the two. To understand how to fix this, we have to look past the ovaries entirely and follow the trail of a hormone called insulin. The new name gaining serious traction in endocrinology and metabolic medicine is PMOS. Polyendocrine Metabolic Ovarian Syndrome. Every word matters. Polyendocrine, affecting multiple hormonal systems. Metabolic, rooted in how the body processes energy at a cellular level. Ovarian, yes, the ovaries are involved, but they are the last stop on a chain reaction that starts somewhere completely different. That somewhere is insulin resistance. Not the vague, general kind mentioned alongside type 2 diabetes, severe, tissue-specific insulin resistance affecting muscle cells, liver cells, and fat cells simultaneously. Here is the chain reaction nobody explains clearly enough. Step 1. Your muscle and liver cells develop resistance to insulin. They stop responding to insulin's signal to absorb glucose from the blood. Blood sugar rises. Step 2. Your pancreas detects rising blood sugar and floods the bloodstream with more insulin to compensate. This is called hyperinsulinemia, dangerously high circulating insulin, and it is the engine driving everything that follows. Step 3. That tidal wave of insulin hits your ovaries. And here is the critical paradox that medicine missed for decades. While your liver and muscles shut their doors to insulin, the hormone factory inside your ovaries stays wide open. To them, this excess insulin acts like a high-voltage stimulant hitting a factory that was never designed to run at that speed. Step 4. Overstimulated by this insulin surge, your reproductive and adrenal systems begin overproducing male sex hormones, testosterone and androstenedione, flooding out of the ovaries. DHEA flooding in from the adrenal glands. These excess androgens halt the normal maturation of egg follicles. Exactly why you see those immature follicles on ultrasound. They disrupt hormonal signaling for regular ovulation. They drive every symptom millions of women live with daily: acne, excess facial and body hair, scalp hair thinning, fatigue, weight gain around the abdomen, and the profound mood disruption and anxiety that gets dismissed as stress rather than recognized as the direct hormonal consequence of a metabolic disorder that nobody properly diagnosed. I know that was a lot of science, but here is the bottom line. Your ovaries are working fine. They are just getting the wrong instructions from a metabolic system that is completely out of control upstream. And because the excess androgens further interfere with insulin signaling, the insulin resistance gets worse, which produces more hyperinsulinemia, which stimulates the ovaries and adrenals further, which produces more androgens, a cycle feeding itself, getting worse over time. In a system the original diagnostic framework was never designed to address. This is why the pill does not fix it. The pill suppresses ovarian function and manages some symptoms, but does absolutely nothing about the insulin resistance driving the entire process. It is why women feel better on the pill and find everything comes crashing back the moment they stop. You cannot fix a metabolic fire with a gynecological bandage. Now, this brings us to the 4 tests that your doctor should order. Standard PCOS treatment follows a predictable and deeply inadequate path. The pill, metformin, vague dietary advice, a referral back to a gynecologist treating the ovaries in isolation. None of this addresses the root metabolic dysfunction. Here are the 4 specific tests you need to walk into your next appointment and demand. Test 1. Fasting insulin levels. Not just fasting glucose, fasting insulin specifically. Most standard blood panels do not include this, but fasting insulin is the most sensitive early marker of hyperinsulinemia. You can have completely normal fasting glucose and still have dangerously elevated fasting insulin driving your entire hormonal cascade invisibly. Demand this test by name. Test 2. HbA1c, glycated hemoglobin. A 3-month average of your blood glucose stability. A single glucose test can look completely normal on a good day. HbA1c cannot be manipulated by one good day. It tells the truth about your metabolic health over time. Test 3. Full endocrine panel. Testosterone, total and free, DHEA sulfate, LH to FSH ratio, prolactin, full thyroid function including TSH, free T3 and free T4. These markers tell the full story across your entire endocrine system, not just your ovaries, all of it at the same time. Test 4. Full lipid panel. Women with hyperinsulinemia and androgen excess frequently have elevated triglycerides and dangerously low HDL. A cardiovascular risk profile that is almost never discussed in standard PCOS management, despite being clinically significant and directly driven by the same metabolic dysfunction. If your doctor has been managing your PCOS for years and you have never had a fasting insulin test or a full endocrine panel, you have not received a complete metabolic evaluation. That is not an insult to your doctor. It is the consequence of a diagnostic framework built on a surgical observation from 1935 that medicine never fully corrected. The good news. When you address the actual root cause, the insulin resistance, the downstream effects begin to resolve. Androgen levels drop. Follicle maturation improves. Symptoms reduce. Cycles regularize. Not because you treated the ovaries, but because you finally addressed the metabolic fire that was overwhelming them. The approaches with the strongest metabolic evidence are not complicated. A low glycemic diet that reduces the glucose load your pancreas has to respond to. Resistance training, which directly improves insulin sensitivity in muscle tissue, the primary site of resistance. Inositol supplementation, which has demonstrated significant clinical benefit in improving insulin signaling in PCOS specifically. And in appropriate cases, medication that addresses insulin resistance at a metabolic level rather than just suppressing the hormonal symptoms downstream. None of this is radical. None of this is experimental. It is what the evidence has been pointing toward for years. It just requires a doctor who is treating a metabolic condition rather than a gynecological one. PCOS affects 1 in 10 women worldwide. Hundreds of millions of women handed a diagnosis named after something that is not there, built on a framework anchored to the wrong organ, and managed with treatments that address the symptom instead of the cause. The renaming to PMOS is not just semantics. It is medicine finally pointing in the right direction after 90 years of looking at the wrong place. You deserved this information the first day you walked into a doctor's office with irregular cycles and unexplained symptoms. Not a prescription and a pamphlet. Share this with every woman in your life who has been told she has PCOS and spent years wondering why the treatment never quite worked. The answer was never in her ovaries.